getting this capacity building week one. Guys, programs like this, for instance, we work with DRE. We support them to conduct events like this, to also publish, for instance, advocacy publications, and what there are different ways of data which you on the website to filter out most of the for your or the kind you're looking for, or the region you're looking for, and then you'll be able to compare different financing options there. You will also have access to information on what is the eligibility criteria we financiers, and what are the documents they look for. The thematic and geographic scope that you see on there, as I mentioned, Sub-Saharan Africa is our largest market, but we support any business model in the energy access sector, but it has to be definitely renewable energy, clean energy. So as I mentioned, our core services going with the Finance Catalyst, which has been around for a long time, and I think quite a few of you have probably heard of it already. The Finance Catalyst offers completely free of cost access to finance advisory for companies and projects in the regions that we work in. We deliver this by means of 25 very experienced advisors who could help you or investment structuring or transaction advisory, etc. They also introduce you to financiers and basically handhold you till the point of financial close in some cases. See on there to the right side of the slide are the key numbers. So we have received so far over 1,000 applications, of which 261 clients. Additionally, as of now, we have had 51 companies that reached financial close and are being considered by different financiers in this process with the financiers. If this has interested you and you apply already, there is an apply button on the GET.invest website. You can access it on the Finance Catalyst. Basic information and specific documents, for instance, financial model or a business plan that you have. And this is a rolling, ongoing time. However, we would like further information on this. We have two, Janos, Daphne. Daphne is feel to reach out to them and go to more on Catalyst. Thanks. Moving on to the second service of GET.invest. This is also in its pilot, just launched last year. And if you're wondering why does GET.invest need a new service, it's because this service is specifically designed for locally owned earlier stage young, and specifically to ensure that these companies can access customized support. And the support is of two kinds, which I will get into shortly. But why did we come up with this is because we had multiple stakeholder conversations with, for instance, companies, etc. And there was also, for instance, a study 2 years back conducted by Gogla that mentioned that 84% of energy access investments globally went to 10 companies, out of which 8 are in Sub-Saharan Africa. And any guesses on how many of these are locally owned or managed? 0, correct. So locally owned companies, even though they are closest to the ground and they have this massive outreach that internationally established companies struggle to handle, they are not able to, they are not able to scale. So the whole purpose of all of us being here, being universal energy access for all, is kind of, we are kind of throwing the hammer on our own feet. This is how we say it in Hindi. We're not enabling the environment to actually reach a goal all of us are working towards. So these companies then receive customized, longer-term support of two kinds. There was an initial cohort elected in January, 15 companies, of which two-thirds are women-owned or managed majority, and 3 out of 5 of these companies are active business models. And by the end of the survey, we're hoping to absorb 24 more of finance readiness support clients. So how we deliver is by means, see there, you probably all of them, or at least some of them, open capital, and the KNG, Catalyst Grid, this is discussion today. And two, which is the customized support, take to companies sustainable and also in part being finance advisory, which is pretty similar to the finance that I described before. If you have more questions on the finance, to approach me, and if not, that's those are my details. Also, feel free to contact me if you need any further information, also generally about GET.invest. But we're done with the GET.invest introduction. I'd like us, considering that started a bit late, to the panel discussion. And for that, I'd like to welcome our 4 panelists over here. The discussion, as I mentioned before, will be increasing active capital for DRE company. We learn from the investor DRE companies, but also the companies on what were their experiences and what are the lessons have, like brilliant ideas to the challenge. Thank you very much. So I will let them introduce themselves. But I would like to start with.
No?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Nabil Saimi. I'm the head of business development at InfraCoAfrica, part of the pitch group. Shall we go to the second round? Or
yes, please. Maybe Toukam can introduce himself, or a few words about InfraCoAfrica.
Part of a large the group. We fund the government made UK, England, Switzerland, Australia, Sweden, SFW, and IFC. So we cover the investment value chain, including debt science. We have Emerging Africa Infrastructure Fund, which is, I believe, the 4th continent. We have also a company called GuarantCo, the currency facility credit enhancement for currency. As but our development and arm of group, so we take early stage development risk. We provide development capital for companies in various sectors. And just to conclude with our presentation of the group, we have a facility called Pitch Technical Assistance. GA provides us assistance during early stage of the project, or at a what we call VGF, viability fund, provide project to reach financial close. All the pitch companies are motivated, are driven by the same kind of mission, which is mainly to alleviate poverty through infrastructure, and also to do this journey. in a nutshell, if you follow me, InfraCoAfrica, and well, as a pitch group, we have been in existence more than 22 years. As a group, we have reached 101 project. We have raised $35 billion investment from private sector investors. InfraCoAfrica has been, well, as a group, we are present. We have investments in more than 40 different countries. More than out of the 171 projects that have been closed, fragile or developed countries. We have InfraCoAfrica have been behind many of the first kind of IPPs in the continent. I can mention the project Cabo Elica in Cape Verde, the first two IPPs in Malawi that are currently project and project. One is a pure solar IPP, and one is the first solar plus hybrid tenants. We have courses, the first IPP in Chad, in Guinea as well. That's on a large scale, kind of grid connected to come back. And on the team of the conference, we have yes, our portfolio is a bit more diversified, although we come in from locally. Today, energy represents still 50% of our portfolio, but we're also in the transport, maritime transport, logistic, water sector, special economic zone, electric mobility. On the decentralized energy, we invest more and more with in our space. We have two investments operational, one with power gen in Iran and with a company called RVE in western side of Kenya, in Busia and Turkana counties, and with friends opportunities. So I'll
Thanks. That's indeed an impressive list of companies and work you're doing there. Toukam, can I invite you, please, use your assistant?
Divya. So I'm Toukam Ngoufanke. I'm with Persistent. We are a early investor, right? Quite early. We invest often pre-seed. Series A, we deploy between $50,000 in capital. We do three things. First is the investing, which we see is very, you don't often have people investing that early. What we do is venture building, right? Because that stage of investment, it is what I was talking about, you the companies to be the first few months, years, I would say. Then the third piece is we advise, and that typically means for us that we manage someone to manage with a fund that does more debt, right? And if this goes a bit to the working capital question, that we are helpful there as well. And the last piece, which is really wrapping up the stuff, is we typically do a lot of thought leadership, right? Because we've been in this sector for about 10 years now, exclusively focused initially on sort of solar-owned systems, but we've evolved over time to do solar-owned systems, looking at other elements, climate, because we're much broader than where we started. I think that would be a quick intro.
So those are the DRE investors on our panel today. We have also two DRE companies. I would like to invite Camille from ANKA, Madagascar, to please introduce herself.
André. Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're doing good. I know this is after lunchtime, but let's try to be energetic and enthusiastic. I do my best anyway. So my name is Camille André-Bataille. Sorry for my English. I'm obviously not an English native. I'm French. Nobody's perfect, but I'm trying and doing my best. So I'm the co-founder and the general manager of a company called ANKA, firstly established in Madagascar, even though very recently also penetrating other markets on the African continent. So we are a DRE company. We are actually a mini-grid, a solar-powered mini-grid developer and operator. But we also are an EC contractor and servicer, always related to mixed energy policy projects technical service, institutional sector or private sector. And we do that in Madagascar and other countries. And the one thing that I can say about our activities related to mini grid is that not only we do most grid and install kilowatt hours to end customers, but we also have this kind of nexus focus and vision where we try to tie energy access to agribusiness development, including irrigation, cold storage, and agri-processing. We also integrate water supply and management within our project, trying to build sort of ecosystem in the villages we work in. And we're also working with electric king, and maybe someday we'll also be trying to integrate e-mobility in the portfolio of our activities. Very shortly are now running like a 2 megawatt capacity, PV capacity of the lot Madagascar, and we are working on financing for an additional 5 megawatt in Madagascar and an additional 4 megawatt pipes in Africa. And this.
That's a best list of work you're doing. I like to eventually get to why you have so many different businesses. Let's get back at some point. Kudzanai, Chitiva, please feel free to introduce Natfort Energy.
Thanks, Divya. My name is Kudzanai. I'm the founder of Natfort Energy. Natfort Energy is a Zimbabwean-based company. We predominantly started as an EPC contractor around 2014. But since then, we've grown to offer other, connected services. Right now, we are running basically 2 business units. The other, which is more interesting business unit that I would say is more focused on the paygo. But we realize that in miles. So with that, we offer as a system distribution card, which then grew to other productive use sort of like services like solar pumps, even other more like life-changing devices, solar TVs. So recently, we've basically rebranded our narrative. We branded ourselves as more of an enabler in the space, whereby we are now saying more sort of like value-added services like connectivity, seeing ourselves as enabler in education, reductions. So we've basically rebranded ourselves now as an enabling company through clean energy services.
Thanks. While I view Mike, you tell us why do so what are you?
Interesting. Of the beneficiaries of the GET.invest supported program of Elevate Readiness Support Program. I'd say we saw energy as an right when EPC contractor really, it was just about who has the money, who has the capacity to pay, and who can afford, right? But as we grew in the business and saw the need, especially when we started interacting with these low-income communities, that's when you realize that you use energy as more than just a source of power, right? These communities really need energy, not only for the basic lighting, but also to be productive. So really, you then realize that energy actually goes on to change lives. And you then find that there also are the interconnected services like agriculture, whereby they need energy for irrigation, but also need information. They also need about using the ancestral thing with energy, but a little bit of service. That one aspect.
And are you able to do this where you are basically looking to finance? And if you are, What are you looking for? What are your financing needs?
Yeah, so I think one of the most changing, as an entrepreneur, especially coming from an African country, is access to finance. The energy business is intensive, right? Is money which require, obviously, from a startup perspective, but more so from a working capital perspective. So really, you then need to start up, but actually, only source and sort of like, family resources to make sure that the business is established, right? And fortunately enough, through working with other partners like USAID and AECF, we then managed to get grants sort of like support the concept, right?
The electricity went off. Can you hear it? Can you speak louder?
Oh, okay. So then you then find that
Yeah, it's working.
so what happens is once you then get catalytic funding from I would say these general organizations and these innovative opportunity grants like ECF and UCDA, it only just utilize. But then when you want to get to the by of concepts, you now really want to make sort of like an impactful business. You want to reach more people, impact more, then commercial, and you cannot only survive on grants. And as a business, you then realize that you need to access commercial financing. And then the commercial financing on its own, it comes with its own headaches, right? Which is really about, are you able to sort of like talk the language that these commercial financiers want to hear? That GET.invest is offering and other similar organizations comes into play, because they then help you sort of like shape your narrative to make sure that it speaks the languages of investors.
Thanks. Camille, can I ask you the exact same question? Why you've diversified? You gave us, I don't know, a list of 15 different businesses that you do. Why is that? And also do tell us what financing needs are as of now.
Okay, so there's not 15 line of businesses. There's no, so basically that is you need to the project. So those are is reached that's the project. Sorry, the project's level, we're struggling with working capital. We see, as has been said, we are trying to support beneficiaries, customers to use electricity in a productive way, because this is what brings what the call the more money. But one thing is startups invade people on use the tree do have so one person gathers that thing is one thing, how is it to be used, and sometimes those have to those gap we is support refinance the financing and acquisition of the electro of the time much constraint the people their own money, which is not supposed to be the case. And this is not part of the mini-grid model either. So that is really at the projects level, but then at the corporate level, as a company running mini grids, and that is where we have set up these different business lines. Setting up a mini grid project takes time, and between the moment you actually start developing the project and the moment it gets commissioned and actually provides electricity that is being sold to end customers, it can take like a couple of years, maybe 2 years in average. But this is a time when you get no money for the services that you're providing or the work that you're doing. So we, as ANKA, decided not to rely on operating grants because it's too volatile and it's not certain enough. It's difficult. That we need to at some point, become more commercial investing for financiers and investors. So we decided to set up other business lines which are more short-term cash generators, still related to our core business. But this definitely helps us solving debt-based challenges. And just the other part of the question, but basically I'd say that at the projects level, what we would need and what we're trying or what we're working at the moment is to set up financial vehicles that will be completely dedicated to supporting the pre-lending acquisition of electrical to restructure of product tools in the mini project. That's the difficult sector, which means that we have to think like a financial institution, which we're not by the end, but we're trying to adapt. And this is the only solution that we've found so far in the EMF and the not really responsive. To go, it's been 7 years, 8 doing this job. So obviously we are in a growth phase, and we do need working capital to invest in new resources, in new skills, to grow, to do more, to do better, faster, stronger. And yeah, that is a huge need. And if we want to improve, this is what we have to do. But yeah, it's a challenge.
Toukam, heard what both the DRE companies had to say in terms of the challenges they faced. I'm very curious to know how persistent actors there to the need companies. They do have, yeah.
Well, thanks, yeah, both of you for sharing. I put on 2 hats, right? Equity side. If you think about capital, subscribe working capital is money, right? It comes out of a timing delay, right? The difference between money and typically working capital implicit money to do what you do. And from angle, what happens with working capital over time is the mix changes. How early we are in this cycle. We are the one financing the first cycle, right? Different with let's say CNI because they're huge from current. But if you think about solar, the first to prove the business model, right? And then what happens over time, hopefully, is that with that, they're in a position to act larger and more, at least more debt funding. Because, as I said, working capital that happens over time, it switches from pure equity to a mix of equity, right? And then that's one angle. But what we also do, because a bit of the what I mean, I think Divya you call technical assistance, but we call it venture building, and where we get involved because having been on the other side, giving out money, you know what investors typically look for, right? Yeah. So that's how one of the biggest things we see is often that the financial state of the company, right? Financial management. That's often like the headache, and investors looking at it and like thinking, my goodness, how am I going to like bring this to my investment committee, right? And so typically get it there. Now, the other hat that I wear when I work in the context of EGF is on the debt side, right? So again, similar. There we try to tailor, right, to see, I think, going back to, Camille, the point you were raising around the cash, right, where we see, okay, do we structure this instrument around making it a bullet? Or do we do a 1 year or 2 year, principal payment holiday? Do we do pay in kind on the interest to try to make sure that it cash cycle of business, right? I'd say again, those hats, I think early stage really it's like those equity, right? And we that, and when business grows, right, on the other side, and try to come in with instruments that tend to be structured. And I mean, a lot of the deals that we're working on now, I would say probably about 60-70% of them probably at least a 1 year payment holiday, because that tries to reflect the fact that, right, it takes time from buying whatever you're buying to making money to pay back anything, right? We've had a few cases where we're looking at just bullet, right? That is one danger that, again, trying to reflect the particular side of the business that to us looking for investment.
Thanks, Toukam. Nabil, is this similar also in the case of InfraCoAfrica?
Yeah, so typically that's, I think it's the same process in terms of maybe because we have two hats also within InfraCoAfrica. The team that I'm leading is looking at projects that are still a bit early stage between seed and their first series of fundraising. We have another window called InfraCoAfrica Investment that is mainly looking at growth capital. One of the latest investments we have with this window is we have just invested recently $15 million in the box to provide kind of a growth capital back to the stage. And typically we look into, the as earlier, the work capital need is one component of your funding. When the ability of your investment cycles just assess the risk associated with this is, as Toukam mentioned, this is a pure equity equity risk that you take in the companies. But above all, this is just declination, I would say, of the risk on the projects. When we invest in mini-grid projects, we know, especially at the stage where we invest, we know it's mainly the team and also the capacity, the implementation capacity of the team. So those are key factors that we're looking at when we take up the investment decision. In terms of tools, depends on, again, assessments of the risk. We can do equity, it mainly can that other convertible loans, for example, we do to have this. You can security, because I know that companies are capitalized, unless we want to play a role in terms of providing this development, this funding needs that Kunzu has mentioned has been missed in the market. So this first round, and thanks again for initiatives like yourself, like GET.invest, because we've seen that a lot. Like we know companies starts the growth cycles with reaching out to grants money providers, but there is a gap between equity and equity fundraising. I think institutions are meant to provide supports. As I mentioned, we have also a technical assistance fund that we provide, but that's mainly when we are already invested in those companies. So those are the areas where we invest and we look to support companies in their early stage development.
Thank you. Are there any other DRE companies in the audience today? 1, 2, 3, 4, 4. Okay, 5 investors in the all right. So I'm wondering who the rest of you are. ITA providers, for instance? Okay, just getting a feel of who is sitting amongst us today. And I'd like to ask Kudzi, for instance, if you needed partnerships, with somebody or other, would be a number of partners to basically catalyze your growth at Natfort.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, well, obviously, right now we're in the growth phase, and obviously my number one priority is to get right. Yes, over and above that, it's really getting a partner who's there and obviously was, inspired. Because what's important at the end of the day is come on the business and offer something to you. Times, when you read the game of raising money, you get to that point where it's not as difficult as it used to be when you started. Then you're looking for something a little bit more than just money. You're looking for so, and you're looking for transparent. And unfortunately, it's something you don't really get, especially with some of these debt providers. That transparency in the long term of ability means so much someone like that. Thank you.
Okay. And Camille, is that the same for you, or do you have other number one priorities for partnerships?
No, you nailed it. No. I think that, we're on the same page. I think that we pretty much have the same understanding of where we are and what are the challenges and what we need. So I would definitely, relate to that and say, yeah, financing is key. The debt facilities are key. I think that's also want to see our business grow and be part of it, and so keep control. I think that is an interesting tool to add to our toolkit. I'll just say that I think that's it's important to consider also local currency debt provision. I think that this is very key. We also offered some initiatives from investors in hard currency, but that this doesn't necessarily make all day as local companies, because to grow we have to spend for local resources, local needs, local whatever, and having a hard currency debt doesn't necessarily match our needs. And I do agree it's very important to work with a trustworthy partner who actually knows about the sector and might be surprisingly quite rare in our space. So that we spend a lot of talking to them. So it's both way waste of time, and it's very frustrating because the middle of the nothing, so the same place.
So how do you think more programs like GET.invest, there are others out there? Do you think we do a better job in helping you address these challenges?
Well, I probably don't have the right answer. I don't know, but I say maybe for good. It's managing to go to the banks, local holders, try joint programs related to the sector that might be, again, I emphasize the need for current science deals. But we'll have to break issues, we'll have to deal with issues with the need at some point to really tackle those issues and solutions. And I do think that by putting aside the local stakeholders, it's not going to solve the situation. So I'd say, long story short, that maybe partnerships and more collaboration between institutions that are familiar with the sector, and working closer with local institutions might be very.
Thanks. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I actually just want to add, I mean, on the question that you've just asked right now. I also believe that I think as I mean organizations like yourself and similar organizations should also create those like intimate relationships with say investors in these companies that are looking for investment. Like it usually the time for even an investor can it can just be a 2-minute transaction. These invest millions, and your role will to facilitate, these intimate relationships, and to do some kind of matchmaking as well, as far as really identifying the kind of investors, that so you time talking to an investor who at the end of the day says, we don't invest in your country, you know, or something like that. So really that matchmaking. But I think one other side of the coin that I think maybe organizations like yours, given the support that you get, maybe given that some of your supporters are maybe the EU and all that, it's really on the policy and regulatory aspect. Trying to find a way to influence, especially our governments, our regulators, to make business easy for us. Because we find that we spend a lot of time, spend a lot of money trying to manage the regulatory issues, trying to manage import duty related issues. So you're trying to help these low income communities, but from the political aspect or from the government aspect, they're probably just looking for votes, right? So there's need to sort of like put a hand in to make sure that even some of these grants that are administered to governments are also tied regulatory changes and make this process easier to do.
Thank you. Insightful. I like to you if would like to respond, because being in terms of one the actual country to that.
I think each investment institution is also bound by its own each policies, investment policies. But it's supposed to be around the investors and where they can invest. They can invest like in this country. There's no institutions are can like we don't invest fly team. Basically, if I can't go or my team cannot go, I cannot invest. And we know there is a tree where there are more subject conflicts our country. So we receive sometimes some opportunities in areas that we have rejected to the whole investment policy is on behalf of InfraCoInvestment is very clear on what countries will invest, where we invest. We have priorities. We invest mainly in developed countries, DAC1, DAC2 kind of classification, OECD classification, these developed countries, but it has to be under the, if you look at indicators like risk control in terms of areas, as I mentioned, those are specific places where we can invest within a country or not. Like I'm thinking about areas in Nigeria, for example, or DRC. Like we're not excluding the whole DRC, but there's regions where unfortunately we cannot today invest in DRC. Just to give an example, I completely, as much as I understand the needs and to have leverage and to bring debt, as part of a group, so have a debt side of the business. I understand there's also some constraints in terms of ticket size to get to the debt level at the stage. That's what we try and also on our side facility that we can aggregate like demand. We know DRE and mid-grade is a volumetric business, is a survival business. You can be difficult situations because you're not recurrent OpEx, you have a lot of recurrent costs. So you need to be able to grow demands qualitatively, quantitatively, both. So you understand that I think a component we have discussed today, this we like it or not, this is on grant, seeing the grants be evolving to what now kind of result based that does not resolve the issue because the company still need to this and they know that's working capital most expensive that you can get. So until we get there, happy to to discuss how we can provide seeing that at least in the short terms, at least at the scale that is needed for the sector.
Thank you, Nabil. If there are any questions, please feel free. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Nabil, this question will be directed to you. You mentioned, aggregating and getting the right size, perhaps sensing the need for minimum size funds towards particular cluster of projects. Is there any particular number at which you deem below what you will look at as far as potential?
I'm not sure if I get right the question, but as I said, like it's what we need to see is a growth. We need to see a growth story. We know we get involved at early stage of companies where, they have 1,000, 2,000, maybe up to 5,000 connections, and then the idea is to help them grow the company to reach the EBITDA positive and like be profitable business. But so you have your S curve, what we call the debt valley for companies where they need to have a way to grow and to grow quickly. So that's why we usually we think I would say we have this between 1.4 million, for back to the side. We have it as well for investments. That's when we do diligence, I all this balance and revenues of those companies. So sometimes you wonder why you would do that because you take your you want maybe multiple years to get before investment. But that's not that magic. You want to manage that GRE by money, the funds is like I would say assist companies go to grow grants and then more grants into the seed stage, and in grant stage they will need times to so just and the during the science mission their current costs not are real, and we try to update the capacity of the challenges so we know there is a kind of a minimum threshold of number of connections if we thinking in terms of pure number of connections, but we know business are now more diversified, trying to diversify between different revenues, which comes, I think that's related to comments of Divya. I think there is also the other side of the coin is like you should not be diversifying too much too early, because otherwise you have a dilution of efforts and of your funding. That's your message gets a bit diffused with your invest. So what's your expertise of how to be able to deliver and to reach this to go through this S value curve.
Thanks, Nabil. Are there any other questions? I have one for seen both sides of the picture. You persistent as an investor, but you also TA provider. You work very closely with companies like ANKA and Natfort. I'm wondering if are there any glaring loopholes from the side of any one stakeholder, whether it's the DRE company, whether it's firms like GET.invest, whether it's from investors, that's not being addressed?
That's a tough question. Let me try. For any, I'd say investor side, and I think this has a bit of something that I think Sanil you brought up. I think there's probably opportunity for better collaboration and sort of that equity and grant sort of like ness. Because what we tend to see is you see sources that have become so grant dependent, they're more or less grant writing, managing machines, right? They've gotten really good at getting grants, but it's not sustainable. And then you have companies that you look at them and you're like, well, really great, could be interesting, needs available because they're doing much better. That I think it's a matter on how you ensure that your grants are kind of like investor might the company side. One of the things that I think you're surprised by is a lot of startups cannot tell the story of their life. I think just going back to the point you made around your growth story, you just don't hear it, right? Like we tend to find a lot of engineers who would have interesting slides telling you about interesting things, but you don't walk away with like, okay, this is a big picture, right? Because you turn out to pitch to people on your investment committee. I mean, if you cannot tell the story, right, whether it's a great business or not, that becomes very challenging. To me, I find shockingly that that's one aspect where people tend to think communicating is put a bunch of slides together with a lot of content, but that there's no overarching story, right? That look, this is the problem was thinking different. This is the traction we. This is the team. Like things that we're bringing, right? It's very missing, right? Very, very missing. And second, which is natural. Like some of the things you see, and it's crazy, right? Like where people build models and they don't spend time to think about like stress testing it. Right? Where you look at some of it, you're like, but this has no relationship with what your track record looks like, right? Like an example that comes to mind a few days back, we're looking at the company, looking at the cash cycle, and you see what they're calling, like essentially your receivable cycle, and you compare it's like this has no resemblance with your track record. Like how in the world are you going to get from here to here, right? And it's not saying it's not doable. I think it's just those that you need to be able to tell a story around. Here's how we get from this today to this place. I think people tend to think the model is as long as you're breaking EBITDA at some point, then you've done a fantastic job. It's like you still need to articulate the 2-3 things that's going to give credibility to that movement from where you are today to where you're saying you're going to be from an investor perspective. Because I mean, I've never seen a startup that has come to us with a business model that doesn't break even. They always break even, right? But the reality that a few years work or not, right? So I think to me it's just those fundamentals of when you have that, and what we often don't see is what are the 3-4 things that you're waging your entire business on, because you need to be able to defend and test it. More basic communication, the 3-4 things he has, and he, and a lot of times you do people tell the 3, right? It's just business, right? As I said, bringing everybody brings even paper. Right? So I think now we would say communication that it takes work, but it's right that like oftentimes that people are unable to tell the story of what they're doing, and two, when you do your modeling, right, that stress test it, right, be able to articulate and how does it fit with what you're doing before with the market you're operating in, because unfortunately or fortunately that's our job our job is to take this pass. Does that make sense? Or does that? So I'd say those are the things. Say both, and then on the investors, as I said, I think there's probably opportunity for better collaboration around how grants and equity align, because you tend to see that there are businesses that are getting a lot of grant, but as an equity investor, you're like, I can't. I mean, I'll get crushed if I put any money in this. You see, like, wow, that's be really good equity. Being part of that honestly goes back to storytelling. People can tell a story of what they're doing.
That's a very, very, very clear point you make there. Thank you. Camille, you've heard what both the investors have just said. And I also understand that you've had to diversify to enable a flow of working capital in your company. But on the other hand, your diversification also kind of story disappear in the middle of all the so how can any of the investors this association Kari, how can you be in a way you're able to give the picture to the investors you approach them? It can also you can also feel free to respond if you have any ideas.
I feel I'm pitching in front of investors. It's super stressful. Yeah. Investment committee.
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure at all. Well, first of all, I think that it's. I mean, we have not enough time to actually elaborate on the company's businesses and why we have diversified what we're doing, and how we're doing it. So I wouldn't say that we are like dealing stories through verification. It is not how I think they have been convinced in supporting us the parties. But I do stand and see the risk of this. I guess that any entrepreneur needs to be supported in some way. I mean, we do not born like superstar entrepreneurs, and we also have to acknowledge our failures. We have to acknowledge our victories as well. But I understand that the storytelling is key. I think that probably if I were an investor, which I'm not, but maybe in the near future, if I were an investor, I think that I would pay a lot of attention to the transparency of the conversation and to the honesty in the conversation. I think that it's key at some point to be honest, not on yourself, but also with the people you're talking to and the people you're trying to deal with. So I do not know what kind of support can be brought to someone who tries to be honest. Maybe it's more on the practical, technical aspect that, yeah, obviously. I mean, when I set up my company, I did it because I had this vision, I had this ambition for the sector. I was trying to do something meaningful where I bring my idea, but at that point, I don't be pitching from the best, and maybe this burden of entrepreneurs that space that sure, honestly. So I think that there's no change to yes to means that there's only one who makes support. My investors also need to be student and count better and what goes on in the life of entrepreneur and what is like. I think that just sometimes missing this can't look like more people not speaking the same language, and we need to the bridge to words and just in order to build the bridge.
Thanks. Yes.
Poetic.
Yeah, thanks for other agree with Camille. I mean, usually they are more focused, right? They problem, and then sometimes all the things are then lost in translations. But I mean, what I've realized is even some of the grant finance with some of the grants that we have, even they're doing business, they use that just to bring that grant and come research, but also kind of with technical support or technical assistance. Is that in what you're doing is pretty much doing that. I think it's realizing that the idea needs to be translated into money. That's the way you can find investment. So I totally agree with say the things that are also next the friends and then it will say that they start that that it convinces these investors. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Kudzi. Question is for either of you, Nabil or Tok. Investors also need to be educated, not just the DRE companies. I think it's a great point, and I have to say it came out also last week. So I'm wondering, do you have the same feeling too? Do you agree to what he said?
Absolutely agree, Camille. Absolutely agree. And one of the things that we try to do, and we're not perfect at it, I think that's part of what venture building does for us, right? Because there are days when I'm with entrepreneurs and you feel their pain. There are days when I've gone to bed and I'm thinking, God, is this business going to make it? Because I'm just like, okay, it's like it's not my business, but because you spend so much time when we venture build with entrepreneurs. And I think the other thing as well, and this goes a bit more to local founders, I think point you raised earlier, Divya, is when we are going through an investment process, sometimes it's because we're trying the mean spirit, because we realize we need to spend to understand what entrepreneurs are doing. I've dealt with entrepreneurs, like you talk with the first time, thinking, oh my God, there's no way I'm making this investment committed. But after you've had 2-3 conversations, you start to understand, this is what they're trying to do, right? But I said it's a choice that I think every sort of investment firm has to make, right? For us, it's like, okay, we realize the stage we're investing in, when we invest in different entrepreneurs, that is the work we have to put in. But I would completely agree that it is a two-way street, right? And I think for us, the venture, that's how I learn how to empathize, because at some point you are involved hands-on with the company and you get to feel the pain they get to feel. Like you cannot be in the trench with somebody for a year and then you walk away and just not feeling anything. And it's tough. I can tell you there are days where I work with entrepreneurs and I'm thinking, my goodness, what are they going to do tomorrow? Like, how are they going to raise this cash? What do they need to do differently, right? So I totally agree that I think it's theirs, but I think it's right of way people do things. For us, that's always a nation of cash venture, because that's part of how we learn, and we learn how to feel what entrepreneurs feel. But I'd say for other investors, it might be different, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing.
Thanks. I can only concur. Hopefully, to invest in this sector, you have to have a minimum of emotional intelligence, as we said. Otherwise, it's not about numbers and ranking numbers. But I completely agree. It's two ways as an investor to come. Like that's why sometimes in due diligence we take good time, because we need to understand better the company, the business, and the investment thesis behind it. But also operationally, my team, and once we invest in project, we handle our project to our asset management team. We get a lot of feedback from executives that get projects we need to take into consideration future investments. I don't want to say we learn by by putting our, but this is certainly about ways, and certainly things could always be improved. Like I'm thinking about the project, have issues on transmission lines. Smile is always complicated. In one of our projects, they have to go through all like with the transfer goes doing invest in what
Your comment was the
I have a question coming from the government side. I provide assistance to government. My interest in being here basically is to see what kind of solutions should government provide to enable private sector investment. So from the experience of InfraCoAfrica, we have done quite well. What can you give us 2 or 3 solutions you have seen working is, grow so fast?
What? Thanks for the kind words, but there's always two sides of the story. One could argue in countries where we have less impact or less involvement of governments tends to work better. But again, we agree that this business for us is a niche or sub-niche in a infra business. So impact of governments, regulations, institutional is always important. But the governments could help your company is to fast track permitting the relation between ministries, to we could speak more about getting the right permits and the time it takes. It's a burning money in this time, and it's eating us in terms of errors. This is time that is valuable. If the good supports businesses in reducing the time it takes them to get all the required permits and authorizations, that will be great help. On the other hand, we know we are in the rural side to be in a situation where numbers are going cost. Even in the Western world, every energy sector, electric sector have been supported one way or other. So what we could ask, why are you going rural Tanzania? Ask them to pay the full cost of energy costs. So there would be some need support. But I think in the meantime, we need just to find the right balance by the effort that are at government level, DF levels, to the form of kind of what will be the right support mechanism, and the or are not getting energy, and that's what you have for. I think that we need also to continue the communication dialogue with the government as well, to understand and to have like a three-party dialogue between financier, government, and having a sustainable system put in place, and people could get access to energy as cost efficient as possible.
Thanks, Nabil. Thank you for the question. Any final comments from any of you? Do you want to? All good? Jens, over to you if you'd like to.
Much, Divya, really session. We come to the end of track 2 for today. So thank you so much, Divya and dear panelists.